The day the sky turned to honey, Elias thought it was the end of the world. Not with a bang, but with a slow, golden, viscous drizzle. Ships the size of thistledown, shimmering with captured sunlight, descended upon his quiet farm. They weren't hostile, these visitors from the stars. They were terrified. Elias, a man built more for fixing tractors than for first contact, stood on his porch, a shotgun held loosely at his side. He watched as the tiny figures, no taller than his thumb, scrambled from their delicate vessels. Their large, luminous eyes were wide with a fear he could feel from 20 feet away. They were fleeing something. The pursuers came not long after. Their ship was a brutish, angular thing of dark metal, landing with a ground-shaking thud that sent the tiny aliens scurrying behind Elias's rain barrels. From it emerged 3 hulking figures in environmental suits, their movements jerky and aggressive. They carried devices that crackled with a malevolent energy. One of them raised its weapon, aiming at a cluster of the tiny refugees hiding in the petunias. The high-pitched, chittering screams that followed were the most pitiful sound Elias had ever heard. It bypassed logic, bypassed fear, and went straight to the core of him, the part that protected fledgling birds from cats and didn't hesitate to help a neighbor. "Hey!" Elias's voice was a thunderclap in the tense quiet. He stepped forward, the old shotgun now held firm against his shoulder. "You're on my land, and you're bothering my guests." The lead hunter turned its helmeted head. A synthesized voice, flat and cold, emanated from a speaker grill. "Stand aside, primitive. These are fugitives. Property. Only property I see here is you trespassing." Elias growled, his finger resting on the trigger guard. He was a wall of faded flannel and stubborn resolve. "Now, I suggest you get back in your ugly boat and fly on out of here. The air's getting mighty thick for your kind." He punctuated his statement by pumping the shotgun. The sh-ch sound was a universal language of warning. For a long moment, the hunters stood their ground. Then, with a final, staticky hiss of displeasure, they retreated into their ship and lifted off, the downdraft flattening Elias's wheat field. Silence returned, broken only by the gentle rustling of the tiny aliens emerging from their hiding places. They gathered before him, a sea of upturned, grateful faces. One of them, slightly taller than the rest and wearing a circlet of what looked like woven light, stepped forward. It bowed, a deep, formal gesture, and then began to speak in a series of melodic chirps and clicks. A small device on its wrist projected a shimmering field around Elias's head, and suddenly he could understand. "Great Protector." The tiny voice echoed in his mind, filled with a profound reverence. "I am Chief Eloran of the Cathar. You have saved our seed song, our future. Our debt is as infinite as the stars. We must honor you." Elias, feeling awkward and colossal, simply nodded, just did what any decent person would do. "No debt needed," but Chief Eloran insisted. The Cathar, he explained, were a people of profound balance. A life saved, a civilization preserved. This was a cosmic imbalance that had to be corrected. They would bestow upon him their greatest gift, the highest honor a Cathar could receive. Elias imagined a new tractor part, or perhaps some kind of advanced seed for his fields. He was wholly unprepared for what came next. 2 days later, a formal procession made its way up his porch steps. Chief Eloran led the way, his face solemn. Behind him, carried on a litter of fragrant alien blossoms, was a single Cathar. As they set the litter down, Elias saw it was a female. Her hair was like a cascade of spun silver, and her eyes, the color of violets after rain, held a terrifying mixture of shyness and unwavering resolve. She was dressed in garments of impossibly fine silk, embroidered with constellations he didn't recognize. Chief Eloran bowed again. "Great Protector, Elias of Earth, to bind our people in gratitude and blood, we offer you Leora, a daughter of our most revered line. She is to be your wife, your companion, the bridge between our world and yours." Elias's brain short-circuited. His jaw went slack. He looked from the solemn chief to the tiny, breathtakingly beautiful alien girl, then down at his own work-roughened hands, each one large enough to cup her entire body. A wife, a mini-wife. The concept was so absurd, so utterly outside the realm of his reality, that he couldn't even form a protest. He was simply stunned, a statue of pure, unadulterated bewilderment. You can't." He stammered, his face flushing a deep crimson. "The ceremony is complete," Eloran said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "She has accepted her sacred duty with honor. We will leave you now to begin your life together." And with that, the entire Cathar delegation bowed in unison, turned and filed back to their ships, leaving Elias alone on his porch with his new, thumb-sized bride. The first week was a masterclass in awkwardness. Elias, a man who had lived alone for a decade since his parents passed, was suddenly responsible for a sentient, precious being he was terrified of breaking. He built her a small, elaborate house from a discarded oak bookcase, furnishing it with dollhouse furniture and scraps of velvet. Every interaction was a logistical nightmare. He left a single blueberry on a porcelain saucer for her breakfast, which she attacked with a surprising vigor, her tiny arms barely able to lift it. He learned to walk across his own living room like a man navigating a minefield, his eyes constantly scanning the floor for a speck of silver that was his wife. He once spent a heart-stopping 10 minutes searching for her, only to find she had climbed onto the windowsill to watch the barn swallows, her face filled with a wistful wonder that made his chest ache in a strange, new way. Leora, for her part, was patient and fiercely dignified. She tried to explain her culture through the small translator she wore, a tiny jewel at her throat. On Cathar, size was not a measure of strength and companionship was the highest form of wealth. To be given as a bondwife was not a diminishment but an elevation. She was an explorer, a diplomat, the first of her kind to bind with a protector. Elias started to see her not as a burden, but as a person. He saw the intelligence in her violet eyes, the graceful way she moved, the quiet sadness that sometimes clouded her features when she looked at the stars. He learned she was a weaver of light silk, and he rigged up a magnifying lamp and provided her with threads of spider silk, which she wove into tapestries that shimmered with captured daylight, depicting scenes from her lost home. The turning point came on a cold, rainy night. A draft whistled through the old farmhouse, and Elias, checking on Leora in her bookcase home, found her shivering under a leaf of a handkerchief. Without overthinking, his instinct to protect overriding the absurdity of the situation, he gently scooped her up, blanket and all. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed. He carried her to his own large armchair by the fireplace, sat down and cupped his hands in his lap, creating a warm, sheltered hollow for her. They sat like that for hours, listening to the crackle of the fire and the drum of the rain. He read aloud from a book of poetry, his deep voice rumbling around her like a comforting earthquake. She, in turn, leaned against his thumb, her tiny hand resting on his skin, a gesture of trust that felt more profound than any wedding ceremony. From that night on, a new routine began. She would sit on his shoulder as he made his morning coffee, pointing out dust motes dancing in the sunbeams with the excitement of someone discovering new galaxies. He built her a small saddle so she could ride on the brim of his hat as he did his chores, her laughter like the tinkling of wind chimes when a chicken curiously peeked up at her. He was her mountain, her protector. She was his window to a universe of wonder, his reminder to see the magic in a dewdrop or the architecture of a spider web. He learned her favorite food was not blueberries, but the sweet nectar from his honeysuckle vine. She, in turn, learned to braid the coarse threads from his old work shirts, weaving him a bracelet so finely made it felt like air on his wrist. They developed their own language, a mix of his words, her chirps, and shared looks. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Leora stood on the windowsill, her small form silhouetted against the immense sky. Her translator jewel glowed softly. Elias, her tiny voice echoed in his mind. On my world, we have a saying. The largest heart is not measured by the space it occupies, but by the space it makes for another. You have made a universe for me in your hands. Elias, a man of few words, felt a lump form in his throat. He reached out a single calloused finger, and she placed her tiny hand upon it. Leora, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I don't think of you as a duty anymore. She smiled, a sight that never failed to make his own heart feel 3 sizes too big. I know, she whispered back, and I do not think of you as just my protector. The hunters returned a month later under the cover of a moonless night. Their ship was silent, their intent clear. They had come to finish what they started, to take the Cathar by force. Elias was woken by Leora's frantic chirping and the frantic tugging on his earlobe. He saw the dark shape outside the window and knew. Rage, cold and pure, flooded him. This was not just a threat to abstract guests anymore. This was a threat to her, He didn't bother with the shotgun this time. He moved with a silent, predatory grace he didn't know he possessed. As the first hunter forced his window open, rage, cold and pure, flooded him. This was not just a threat to abstract guests anymore. This was a threat to her. He didn't bother with the shotgun this time. He moved with a silent, predatory grace he didn't know he possessed. As the first hunter forced his window open, Elias was there. His hand, the same hand that cradled Leora with infinite care, shot out and seized the intruder by the wrist. There was a sickening crunch of metal and presumably bone. He threw the shrieking alien back through the window into his two companions. He then strode to his tool rack, selected the heaviest sledgehammer, and walked out into the yard. What followed was not a fight. It was a demolition. He was a force of nature, an avenging giant. He smashed their scanning equipment, caved in the hull of their ship with 3 mighty blows, and stood chest-heaving over the cowering hunters. They saw not a primitive human but the embodiment of the wrath they had brought upon themselves. "You tell your bosses," Elias snarled, his voice low and deadly. "The Cathar are under my protection. This planet, this farm, is a sanctuary. If any of you so much as orbit this moon again, I will personally scrap your entire fleet. Now get off my world." They fled, their ship limping into the sky, trailing smoke and shame. When it was over, Elias turned to find Leora standing on the porch railing, her small frame trembling, but her eyes blazing with pride and something else, something fierce and adoring. He walked over, the adrenaline fading, and knelt before her, suddenly feeling exhausted. She reached out and placed her hand on his cheek. Her touch was cool and soft. "My husband." Her voice echoed in his mind, filled with a love as vast as the space between their stars. "My great, wonderful husband." Elias smiled, a true, unburdened smile. He finally understood. The chief hadn't given him a burden or a novelty. He had given him a missing piece of his own soul, a love that proved the universe didn't care about scale, only about connection. He was a simple farmer, and she was a princess of a lost world, and together in the quiet heartland of Earth they were perfectly, impossibly whole.